The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. If you're a new listener, I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host Beth.
Hello, all you fellow wanderers.
So, for tonight's episode, instead of Beth and I sharing different stories, we decided to cover just one topic.
Yeah, we really wanted to take a deep dive into this one and cover as much as possible because there's a lot.
That there is, and I have found the stories about this creature captivating for quite some time. So, with that said, sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it.
A cool summer morning in early June is when the legend began. At a nameless logging camp in Wexford County where the Manistee River ran. 11 lumberjacks near the Garland Swamp found an animal they thought was a dog. In a playful mood, they chased it around till it ran inside a hollow log. A logger named Johnson grabbed him a stick and poked around inside. Then the thing let out an unearthly scream and came out and stood upright. And so begins The Legend, a song recounting the legend of the Michigan Dogman. The Dogman is a 7-foot-tall hybrid creature, half man, half canine. It has the head of a German shepherd with blue or amber eyes. Its thin, human-like body is covered in fur with the exception of its chest. The Dogman is known to let out incredibly terrifying shrieks. Often spotted alone, it has also been known to travel with packs of wild dogs, only to make its true nature known by standing upright like a man. And it fills those who see it with a mixture of dread, complete unease, and in many cases, pure fear. If you're thinking, isn't that a werewolf? We can totally see how it might be confusing. One difference is that werewolves transform from man to wolf with the phases of the moon. Dogman doesn't transform. It's always half man, half dog. Although the song sounds like it may have been passed down for hundreds of years, that's just not the case. It was April Fool's Day, 1987, and radio host Steve Cook out of Traverse, Michigan, was about to prank his listeners. He came up with a great idea. He would create and share a legend about a half-dog, half-man cryptid that he called the Dogman. Cook based his idea on his knowledge of other North American cryptids and wrote a poem about his creation. He set it to music and he played it on air. It was a great prank, or so he thought, because something strange happened. People started calling into the radio station to report their own sightings and their grandfather's sightings and sightings they'd heard of from the 1800s. Whether Steve Cook knew it or not, whether he based part of his legend on factual accounts or not, we may never know. But what he did do was open the door for people to talk about a cryptid that has been dogging Michigan for close to 200 years. Although Cook still says he came up with the Dogman legend himself, his tune has changed a little bit in the last 21 years, both literally and figuratively. In an interview he gave to Traverse magazine in 2008, he said, quote, "My quotable line is, enough credible people have told me incredible stories. Maybe there is something going on out there, and we just happen to hit the right note." End quote. As the years have gone by, He's added verses to his song to reflect the more credible sightings. So, Wes, my dear, why don't you tell everyone what people have been seeing in Michigan?
Well, from all accounts, it's something you really don't want to run into. The first alleged encounter happened in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. 2 lumberjacks reported an encounter that they had with a large creature. They claimed that it had the body of a man, but the head of a dog. Now, I say alleged encounter because although every site related to Dogman mentions this, we weren't able to find any newspaper accounts to back it up. One of the first documented encounters with a Dogman-like creature took place in 1936 in Wisconsin and not Michigan. But you may know this story by a different name, the Beast of Bray Road. Mark Shackleman was the night watchman at St. Coletta Convent in Racine. One night, as he walked the school grounds, Shackleman spotted something both confusing and alarming in the distance at the native burial grounds near the convent. It was a creature with black fur and long black claws, and it was digging in the dirt. Shackleman claimed the creature gave off the scent of a dead animal, and although it looked like a dog, it was kneeling like a man. As Shackleman got closer, the creature noticed him and took off. The following morning, when Shackleman investigated the spot where he had seen the creature, he found strange footprints in the dirt. That night, as Shackleman made his rounds, he saw the creature again. And yet again, it was scratching the dirt of the burial mound. As Shackleman approached with his flashlight aimed at the beast, it noticed him. Rather than run off, the creature raised up until it was standing up on 2 feet. It was easily 6 feet tall, and as it locked eyes with the terrified watchman, the impossible creature opened its mouth and growled. Except it wasn't like any other growl a canine would make. It sounded like the word Gadara.
Now, just out of curiosity, I Googled the word Gadara or Gadara, and it's spelled Gadarah. And apparently it's a very popular Armenian girl's name that means from the top of a mountain. If you remove the H from the end, it's also the name of an ancient Greek city that's in the present-day country of Jordan. And it's mentioned as a city in the Bible.
So, does any of that tie in? Or could it just be coincidence?
There's no way to tell, really, but it was interesting to me that it's an actual word and not just a nonsense word.
But anyways, are the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman the same species? Well, I think there's a definite possibility. So back to Michigan in 1938. 17-year-old Robert Fortney was fishing by himself on the Muskegon River. Fortney said that all of a sudden, he was surrounded by at least 6 wild dogs. Luckily, he also had his rifle, and thinking fast, he fired a shot into the air. All the dogs ran off except for one. Covered in black fur and with piercing blue eyes, this dog literally grinned at him. Fortney fired again, and the dog rose up on 2 feet, just like a man, before running away on its hind legs. Did radio jockey Steve Cook know about the Beast of Bray Road when he wrote his song? I wouldn't doubt it. He did say that he based his cryptid on North American legends, and I can imagine he was probably surprised when Robert Fortney called the radio station to recount his experience.
And as we said earlier, the radio station was flooded with calls. People had been seeing the Dogman for multiple decades before and after the April Fool's episode. One account that predates Cook's April Fool's joke is from 1961. A man who chose to stay anonymous lived across the street from the manufacturing plant he was employed at, which also just happened to be next to the Haymarsh State Game Area. Around 3 a.m, the man spotted someone loitering next to the chain link fence near the plant. Whoever it was seemed suspicious, So the man grabbed his gun and went outside, I'm assuming to try and scare off this other guy. By the time the man got outside, he could see this figure clearly, and it was no man. Instead, it was a 6-foot-tall canine covered in grayish-brownish fur, and it was standing on 2 legs. And it was now slowly walking across the man's driveway. The man ran back inside, swapped his gun for a camera. Why would you? I wouldn't swap my gun. Like, if this thing was crossing my driveway, I would want my gun and my camera. But that's just me. The man ran back inside, swapped his gun for a camera, and returned to his door. But by that time, the Dogman was much further down the road. He waited until the creature made it to a streetlight, and he allegedly took a few pictures before it disappeared from view. The one photo I was able to find was pretty compelling. If it's one of the photos from that night, there wasn't any caption or attribution on the photo that I found. But people have been seeing the Dogman ever since the 1987 broadcast, too. The next 3 encounter stories are from listverse.com. In Battle Creek, Michigan, at the intersection of Dickman and Clark Roads in the year 2000, a 28-year-old woman slowed down one night so a dog could cross the road. It looked rather mangy with gray fur. As it reached the other side of the road, about 15 feet away from her car, the creature stopped. Then it stood up on its hind legs like a man. The woman described it as having the physique of a young boy, but the ears of a German shepherd. It locked eyes with her, and the woman said she knew that it was hungry. Terrified, she drove off.
And in 2007, 3 hunters were in Reed City, Michigan, at around 4:30 p.m. Each hunter had his own tree stand. Suddenly, all the birdsong and insect noise stopped, and in the silence, 3 deer came crashing through the underbrush. Obviously, they were being pursued by something. A foul odor filled the air, and suddenly, a bipedal creature covered in fur stepped into view. Even though it walked hunched over, the hunter named Sam saw its yellow eyes. But over the next 3 days, despite initially making fun of him, Sam's hunting buddies each saw the creature for themselves. Just like earlier accounts, the men described the Dogman as grinning at them. One of the men used his walkie-talkie to radio the others and ask if either of them was dressed up in a werewolf costume. But of course they weren't. The final encounter we want to share from Listverse happened on US 31 near the West Weber Road overpass. Around 11:30 p.m., retired law enforcement officer Laura Love was a passenger in a car being driven by a friend. She said, quote, "We saw a large, tall, dark, and oddly shaped creature run out from the left side of the overpass and hit the rear quarter panel of the small truck in front of us, causing the truck to fishtail," end quote. The truck kept going, but Love said she was able to see what hit it pretty clearly. It was a bipedal creature covered in dark fur, around 7.5 feet tall. She said its knees were bent backwards, and it had a head similar to a border collie, with a, quote, lion's mane of hair around its neck.
You know what I find really interesting about all of these encounter stories is that Steve Cook never really described the Dogman in his song, other than to say it was around 7 feet tall and it stood on 2 feet. But all of these people are describing the same color fur and the same eye color and the same breed of dog, with the exception of Laura Love. They all said it had like a German shepherd head. So I find it really interesting. And they all said that it grinned at them, which I find super creepy. And none of that is in his poem from April Fools.
Right. They all sound like your typical werewolf.
Right. So is that because they're seeing something they can't identify and then they just relate it to the werewolf idea that we all recognize? Or is there more to it?
I don't know.
I know. That's why it's so fascinating.
That it is. All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go into more encounter stories.
Hey, did you know? In 897, Pope Stephen VI ordered that former Pope Formosus be exhumed so that he could put his corpse on trial. This was known as the Cadaver Synod. Formosus was dressed in his pontifical robes and placed on a throne. As Pope Stephen screamed at the cadaver, accusing him of coveting the papacy and ruling over more than one congregation at a time, an earthquake rocked Rome. The cadaver was found guilty and it was stripped of its robes before having 3 of its fingers cut off. Pope Stephen had Formosus buried again, but that wasn't enough for him. He exhumed him again and threw the man's corpse into the Tiber River. Who'da thunk it?
Alrighty, let's get back to it. There are plenty more sightings of the Dogman in Michigan. In July of 2006, north of Fort Custer, a man spotted a strange creature standing on the side of the road. The quote, man-animal was between 6 to 7 feet tall, and it was upright on its hind legs. As the man drove closer, the furry creature squatted down on all fours and then dragged itself with its long, sloth-like arms into a cornfield, commando style.
That's creepy as F.
Really creepy.
Sorry, but that is creepy, commando style, dragging itself across a field.
And in a more recent encounter, which was reported by the Midland Daily News, recounts a YouTube channel interview with a trucker named Joe Barger. It occurred in 2018 in northern Michigan as Barger transported 43,000 pounds of paper. As the 59-year-old followed his usual route through a forested area on a June evening, he pulled over to check an air leak. As he lay under the trailer, he suddenly got a, quote, bad feeling. Then he heard some strange vocalization that didn't sit right with him. He noticed a shadow near the wood line and immediately assumed it was a black bear. So he hopped back in his truck and checked the air pressure, which was fine now. So he headed back on his way. Not long after, Barger glanced out his side mirror. Something was darkening it out. He estimated that he was going about 20 to 25 miles per hour, and whatever it was reflected in his side mirror, and it was keeping pace. That's when he realized what it was. Something with a wolf's head, about the same size as his window, which was rolled down at the time. This wolf-like creature, running alongside his truck, had bright, white, very sharp teeth. Barger said that its fangs were about 3 inches long. Its eyes were yellow, and it had black pointed ears. As it ran alongside his truck on 2 feet, it grabbed onto his windowsill with clawed hands. Barger said they were easily 14 inches across. And just as alarming, Barger estimates the creature had to be at least 9 feet tall because it was crouching as it ran in order to directly look at him as he drove. And the Dogman, it didn't look happy at all. Barger said it sneered at him, and he could tell just by the look in its eyes that it was trying to send a clear message. I'm here to get you, and there's nothing that you can do about it. His first thought was to try and roll up the window, but instead, Barger pulled out his .45 Colt. While trying to stay on the road, Barger shot the creature twice. He said it instantly went down and he watched it slide into the weeds at the side of the road. But he wanted to make sure it was dead, so about a mile up the road, he found a spot to turn around. It took him no longer than 5 minutes to return to the spot where he had seen the creature fall. There was no body, but there was a Jeep. 2 people now stood at the side of the road. When Barger approached them, they claimed they had stopped because they thought they had seen 2 bears fighting each other. Unnerved, Barger got back in his truck and left. He made it to his destination, although he says he has no memory of how he got there, because he was so disturbed by what he had just been through. He mentioned that he had heard of Bigfoot in that area, but in his mind, Bigfoot was nothing compared to the Dogman. If you want to watch the YouTube video for yourself, you can find it on the What Lurks Beneath channel.
And I'll put the link in the show notes so it's easier for people to find. So, what's going on here? Can all of these sightings simply be attributed to a bunch of people hearing Steve Cook's radio show about the Dogman in 1987, then spreading the legend he claims he made up, and then imagining things? That theory hardly explains the sightings that happened prior to 1987. Or did Steve Cook stumble upon an actual cryptid by complete coincidence? Does it add credibility to the sightings if Dogman isn't just localized in Michigan? Because he's not. He's been seen in plenty of other places, like Missouri. According to 100.9 The Eagle radio station website, a former Air Force man named Ken shared his experience on YouTube. In 1993, Ken was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base. As an Air Force security specialist, part of his job was to ensure that B-2 stealth bombers were safe. During a training exercise in the nearby Knobnoster State Park, which is a great name, by the way, Knobnoster.
It's unique.
I'm sorry, I get sidetracked. Knobnoster.
My God.
Sorry to all you Missouri people that think I'm making fun of your state park.
No, she just likes the knob.
Oh, my.
That was rather inappropriate.
Very.
Believe me, she doesn't like the knob.
Oh, my God, stop talking. It's my turn.
All right, go ahead.
During a training exercise in the nearby Knobnoster State Park, he and his 3-man team began to smell something horrendous in the woods around 1:30 a.m. At first, they assumed it was a nearby chicken farm, until one of them caught red eyes staring at them through his night vision goggles. They knew pretty quickly that it wasn't an owl, as the creature's full body came into view. It looked like a wolf, but it was standing on its hind legs, and it was at least 8 feet tall. Then something caught their attention behind them. They were being surrounded by more dogmen. Thinking quickly, they were able to avoid an ambush. Interestingly, that area that is now Knobnoster State Park was once home to indigenous peoples known as the Mound Builders, as well as members from the Osage Nation. So that's interesting because in that other story, the man had said it was digging at a burial mound.
That's correct.
In Ohio, a man came face to face with the Dogman one evening while he was at an unnamed lake. He said that without knowing why, he suddenly felt a sense of dread wash over him. He decided to head up a riverbank, and he switched on his headlamp so he could see better. Illuminated in his light was a sycamore tree, and at its base, kneeling down, was the menacing cryptid. It caught sight of him, too, and lifted itself onto 2 feet. The man described it as a, quote, perfectly adapted killing machine. A witness in Georgia was rafting with friends. He, too, was a former military man, having spent 21 years in the Army. He separated from his friends so he could go relieve himself. And when he stepped into a clearing, he found himself, quote, a genetically mixed entity of man, wolf, and primate, end quote. He said it was at least 7 feet tall and weighed 350 to 400 pounds, since it dwarfed him in size, and he was 6 feet tall and weighed 250 himself. And lastly, there was a deputy sheriff who was out on call attempting to locate and rescue a young man who was reportedly sucked into a sewage drain. The officer parked his car at an electric company storage yard. As he stood on one side of some railroad tracks looking for this young man who was in trouble, the officer suddenly heard a strange snorting sound. As he lifted his light towards the sound, he saw some sort of creature with pointed ears and a long muzzle. It stared back at him before taking off towards the tree line. The officer said, quote, it was not a mask and it was not a person in a costume. Who would walk up on an armed man with a police radio in full uniform and risk getting shot, end quote.
So, what exactly are people seeing? Was each of these stories simply the case of misidentified animals? Did Steve Cook's radio broadcasts create a tulpa?
Oh, there's an idea.
Well, I like the whole tulpa theory. But you can't explain everything away as being a tulpa. It just doesn't seem right to me. Some of these are actual creatures, actual cryptids, I believe.
And especially, I keep coming back to it, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if they're having these sightings before 1987, then it seems likely to me that it would not be a tulpa.
Right.
Is it possible to separate fact from myth? Most of the sightings, according to Dogman researchers, seem to occur near either military installations or Native American burial mounds, begging the question, is Dogman a skinwalker or a military experiment? As far as I can tell from taking a quick internet dive, the mound builders, like the Osage, didn't have any beliefs about skinwalkers. So it's not likely that that's what they are. And, honestly, do we really think the U.S. military is creating human-dog hybrid warriors?
Well, I don't think so, but there are some people out there that would believe it to be true. Yes, I'm sure.
Well, that's true. So why is there seemingly a connection to those places? I don't know. And legend says, although I have to interrupt myself and ask, whose legend, right? Because Steve Cook says he made it up.
Right.
But legend says that the Dogman shows up every 10 years in years that end with the number 7. Steve Cook's song mentions 5 specific years, and they do all end in the number 7.
Yeah, but 5 out of the 6 stories we shared that has specific dates to them did not end in 7.
Right. So I guess we have at least 4 more years to figure that part out.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see what new Dogman sightings are reported in the future. And if there are any new ones, we will do an update to this episode.
Yes, we will.
And I love the Dogman stories. He's a lot scarier than Bigfoot to me.
Sounds like it. And I know you've been into Dogman for a long time because you've talked about him before and we've listened to things about Dogman. But yeah, he sounds like he makes Bigfoot look a little wimpy.
Yeah. And can you imagine taking your Dogman for a walk out to the park? Hands down, you've got the biggest dog in the park, the meanest dog in the park.
And when you tell him to fetch, he'll just drop down and go commando style across the park.
Okay, all you wanderers, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. So join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon.